This episode is brought to you by Roon. Roon 1.8 is an immersive new music experience featuring a new look, new intelligence, and new features designed for music fanatics. Click the link in the description box below for more information.
Today we're going to look at a shoebox integrated from South Korea. It weighs 4 kilograms. It's called the Enleum AMP-23R. So Enleum is the manufacturer, AMP-23R is the name of the amplifier. It's a Class AB amplifier. It gives us only 25 watts per channel into 8 ohms and 45 into 4 ohms. There's no DAC, there's no streamer, there's no phono stage. It's just an amplifier. Adding insult to injury, there are only 2 single-ended analog inputs on the back, no balanced. There are some BNC inputs for a future Enleum product, but that's not with us yet. Also, this thing sells for a whopping 5 grand, and the vibration attenuating feet are an extra 500 bucks. So this is not cheap. And you've really got to be a bit of a baller to make this amplifier work in today's market of shoebox streaming amplifiers that come with their own DAC and sometimes phono stage. But maybe, just maybe, Enleum's head designer, Soo-In Che, has something else tucked up his sleeve with this amp. Today, we find out. But we start this story by going back to my childhood to talk about my Uncle Rodney. Now, Uncle Rodney, he loved a good dad joke, and he also loved to spend time in his garden shed building stuff, like just, I guess, what he would call inventions. But whenever I asked Uncle Rodney what was it exactly that he was building, he would just sort of tap his nose and wink and then not say anything, and we had no idea what he was really working on. But that all changed, I think it was just before my 12th birthday, with the grand unveiling of what he'd been working on for the previous few years. And it was a go-kart. Now, this go-kart didn't run like a traditional go-kart, in that when you fired the ignition or turned it on, you had to have your foot firmly on the brake. Because if you didn't, you just fly off. Because there was no gas pedal. What you'd have to do is just slowly let your foot off the brake to allow the go-kart to move forward. It obviously had a steering wheel and things like that. But to slow it down, you push the brake. To make it speed up, you'd let go of the brake. It was all brake driven. And my Uncle Rodney's go-kart is a bit like how most modern amplifiers work today, in that they take an input signal, they make it louder, and then they send it out to the output stage of the amp that then drives the loudspeakers. But the typical amount of gain applied to the incoming signal is anything between 30 and 40 dB. And then what we do as users is we turn that down with the volume control. It's like applying the brake to the go-kart. So we get all the gain and then we turn it down again to a suitable listening volume. And that means that the lower we turn the volume, the closer the signal level gets to the noise floor of the circuit, because it's a fixed gain circuit. Now, the Enleum AMP-23R does not work like this at all. It's not like other amplifiers. So the gain in the Enleum amp isn't fixed, it's variable. And with no real sort of pre-amplifier stage to speak of inside, we might best think of the AMP-23R as a variable gain power amplifier. Now, this amplifier's designer, Soo-In Che, he calls the volume wheel, what we would call a volume wheel, the gain phase control. So when you turn that volume wheel, what it does is it triggers a digital signal inside the amplifier, which is then microprocessed to talk to 10 relays. And then those 10 relays talk to 10 corresponding resistors. And each relay, and therefore output resistor, has 2 possible states, on or off. So you've got 10 relays, each with an on or off possible state. So we can have 2 to the power of 10 possible combinations of settings on those relays. That's 1024 different volume settings. And then those output resistors eventually talk to an output stage which is built around a pair of hexagon output transistors per channel, so 4 all up. Another clever thing that Soo-In Che has done is those MOSFETs, their class AB bias is monitored and then adjusted in real time, and that's done in the digital domain with a sort of a feedback circuit, but not in the traditional audio feedback circuit sense. But there is no feedback apparently in this amplifier, none at all, I think. I started by connecting the AMP-23R to a pair of Wilson Audio TuneTot stand mounts. Now Wilson rate these as nominally 8 ohm in their impedance with a dip as low as 6.6 ohms. So pretty easy to drive on paper. But remember, the AMP-23R only gives us 25 watts per channel into those 8 ohms. Wilson also recommend the minimum amplification to be used with their speakers is 25 watts per channel. So we kind of lucked out there really, I think. However, the efficiency of the Wilson Audio TuneTots is a lowly 86 dB. Now what that means is if you sit 1 meter in front of the speaker and you feed that speaker 1 watt of power, you will get 86 decibels of sound pressure levels at that 1 meter distance. So that's typical of stand mounts of this size and this type, but that efficiency is generally deemed to be kind of low across the entire marketplace of loudspeakers. But here's the thing, I played the new Dean Wareham album, which is called I Have Nothing to Say to the Mayor of LA. And it's like guitar, drums, bass, it's fairly sort of traditional. I wouldn't even call it indie rock. Dean Wareham used to be in the indie rock outfit Luna, and before that Galaxy 500, but this is a fairly straightforward band type album. It's not especially angular or weird or anything like that, and it sounded utterly sublime through the Enleum Wilson combination. I mean, just the presence of music and the palpability was something I'd not heard from these Wilsons before, and that's a presence and palpability that the NAD M10 V2 and the NAIM Uniti Atom just cannot match. The Enleum gives us more abundant tonal color and a greater sense of sort of music's liquidity than both of the more affordable, more feature-packed rivals. And it also possesses one of my favorite qualities of music playback that I don't actually hear very often. And that's what I call dynamic elasticity, where a sound will pop out and then come back, but it won't go forward and then back in a sort of jerky way. It kind of, there's a bit of an elegant flow to it. I just sort of did that, didn't I? Yeah. But when we play something like Luigi Tozzi's Le Grand Bleu, which is ambient techno with a heavy bass pulse running through it, it unearths a fairly significant compromise of this Enleum Wilson combination. So the TuneTot isn't the weightiest of speakers in the low end to begin with. It really needs an amplifier that can make it sound bigger in all directions and give it that sort of forward push in the bass. And the Enleum isn't it. Not in my 6 meter by 5 meter room anyway. Now gain isn't the issue here, because I was using a Raspberry Pi based system feeding into a topping USB SPDIF converter, feeding into a Chord Qtist DAC. The Qtist was set at the industry standard 2 volt output. and then that went into the Enleum's analog inputs. And the volume wheel on the Enleum, I could barely take it past 10 o'clock when paired with the Wilsons. So yeah, gain is not the issue here. It's a power issue, I think, because maybe 25 watts per channel into 8 ohms for some of the bass heavy music that I listen to just isn't enough. And I must qualify this bass heavy music, because if I was just listening to Dean Wareham all day, it wouldn't be an issue. An amplifier that sells for a similar price to the Enleum is the HEGEL H390. Adding that into the Wilson TuneTot system really pumps the tires on the low end. It adds the sort of much needed forward push and shove and heft that I want from that Luigi Tozzi cut. But the compromise with the HEGEL when compared with the Enleum is that tonal color from the HEGEL sounds a bit more like shaded pencil compared to the Enleum's sort of ultra vivid inky crayon. So the TLDR of this situation is that the AMP-23R works wonders with the Wilson Audio TuneTot above the waist, but less so below it. So perhaps this Enleum amp needs a more sensitive loudspeaker to complete its picture. The other speaker you see behind me is the ZOOaudio Sol 6. It's also an 8 ohm loudspeaker, just like the Wilsons. But unlike the Wilsons, it is 99 dB efficient. So that means if we fire 1 watt of power into that loudspeaker and sit 1 meter away, we will be able to register 99 dB of sound pressure level. That's much, much louder than the Wilsons. That's why this speaker is deemed to be more sensitive or more efficient. Those two words aren't really interchangeable, but I'm not going to get into that here. Now here with this HEGEL Enleum sort of A-B comparison, the AMP-23R pulls out all these sort of fine strands of detail from the mid-range and the top end that when I listen to the same tracks on the HEGEL, it just sounds a little bit foggier, a little bit murkier. And I'm mainly talking about sort of acoustic albums here from the likes of Lowe or Grant Lee Phillips or even Robin Hitchcock. And of all the amplifiers I have in this house, even the big HEGEL H590, the little 25 watt per channel Enleum pulls the best performance from the Zoo speakers than any of them. And that's also true of the Klipsch Forte IV. I would pick the Enleum as my favorite amplifier for those speakers as well, because those speakers are also 99 dB efficient. So we don't have to worry about the low end so much with heavier sort of techno or electronic music with those kinds of pairings. So the HEGEL is absolutely my #1 pick really for the Wilsons, because I can't do without that low end push with the Wilsons. I need an amplifier that's going to deliver enough power into them, and enough, well, that power would give enough control of that mid bass driver to really make the bass pop out properly and not sound too tepid. And that means when I'm listening to electronic music, if I've got the Wilsons, you know, in play, I would not use the Enleum amplifier. I'd go with the NAD, the NAIM, a HEGEL, something like that that really has good control over the low end. But when it comes to the Zoo or the Klipsch, the Enleum would absolutely be my #1 choice when it comes to amplification. But if I only listen to that acoustic stuff by Lowe or piano music, the Enleum with the Wilson would be totally fine. It's only when I play electronic music like Underworld or Orbital, I'm looking at my stack of CDs here, or Steffi's Fabric Mix or some LSG, only in that case would I need an amplifier for the Wilsons that had more power on tap. Alternatively, I would use the Enleum with the Zoo or the Klipsch or another high efficiency loudspeaker. It's just the interface. I'm doing this thing again, aren't I? The interface between the loudspeaker and the amplifier is very, very, I'm laughing, but it's very, very important. We're not quite done yet, because on the front of the AMP-23R is a 6.4mm headphone socket, and that talks directly to the Jet 2, that's what Enleum call it, amplification circuit inside the amp. And oh boy, is this headphone amplifier really, really, really good. It's amazing. Now, this is rare, because generally speaking, I say generally, more times than not, the headphone output on an integrated amp is a bit of an afterthought. It works, it's fine with 32 ohm headphones, but it doesn't set the world on fire. And normally you'd have to step up to something like a SCHIIT Jotunheim or Rupert Neve headphone amplifier to really bring your headphones to life, especially if they're of higher impedance or just higher end and demand higher quality amplification. That's what you'd normally have to do. But you don't have to do that with the Enleum, not at all. So from the AMP-23R's headphone socket, we get 4 watts into 60 ohms. It's pretty powerful. There's plenty of juice on tap. I pulled out the ROSSON Rad Zero that I reviewed about a year ago. Fantastic headphone. Really tells me what amplification is doing. And I fired up one of my favorite test discs, which is David Byrne's Uh-Oh album, which is heavily Latin flavored. There's lots of horns on it. There's lots of percussion. It was released in 91 or 2, I think 92. Before the loudness wars really got going, so the dynamic range on it is excellent. It's such a great test record because it can get very busy at times, and you want some sort of hi-fi system or head-fi system that can sort out that busyness. And the fast percussion on this David Byrne album really sounded much zippier through the Enleum than it did through the SCHIIT Jotunheim 2 that I have. And there's just greater clarity and that dynamic elasticity. It's there and it's not in the SCHIIT. Anyway, basically, if you're a headfire and you've got high-end headphones, you really need to hear this little Enleum. You might never have heard of it before. They used to be called Bakun, or rather, Suin Che's business used to be Bakun International. So he was doing work for Bakun in Japan. But due to some legal wrangling, which I'm not going to go into here, Suin decided to kind of break away from that, start afresh. He's got this new Enleum brand, and I really think he should be marketing this as much to headphone people as to loudspeaker people. I'm both. I'm both because the only way to hear what music should sound like without the influence of a room is with headphones, even this room, because the bass still isn't perfect in this room. I still need headphones to know what's really going on. This Enleum might not have all the modern bells and whistles that we find on modern day streaming amps, but with the right loudspeakers or with a pair of headphones, it leaves its rivals eating dust. And I think that is super impressive. If you like this video, please hit the like button down below. If you like my attitude towards high-end audio, in that very occasionally I'll tackle something that very few people have heard of to see what it can do. I was kind of nervous about going into this review thinking, you know, what if 25 watts per channel aren't enough? But they are with the right speaker. That's the key. With the right speaker, it's a wow. Anyway, if you dig all of that, please subscribe to this channel. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.